Welcome back, everybody, to On the Ball, the new video podcast series from Vanderbilt Sports and Society Initiative. Really excited to have Jason Smith with us today. Jason has been involved with a project to, really record, commemorate the work of Grantland Rice, someone that means a lot to those of us who have a connection to Vanderbilt. So, Jason, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And tell the crowd here, where are you and what are you up to these days professionally?
I'm in a high school right now. I'm in a private Episcopal school here in Greenville, South Carolina, called Christ Church Episcopal School. My background of how I'm connected to Vanderbilt. I did my PhD there in religion. Was a postdoctoral fellow for a while in Jackson, Mississippi, at a college called Tougaloo College, which is an HBC there in the area. I was teaching humanities courses, and here I teach Bible, I teach world religions, and I teach theory of knowledge for students in the International Baccalaureate program. And so I spend most of my days talking about God and talking about what we know and talking about sports, and that's pretty much all I do.
What a combo. When we think about the sports writers in history, Grantland Rice would be probably the god of American sports writers.
Yes,
But
indeed.
so you've got this interest in theology. That's what brought you to Vanderbilt. Where did your interest in sports come from?
My father, my mother, my sister, my wife, and my grandfather for a time all went to the University of Georgia. So I was raised a SEC football fan. And so that was, yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth on how much I want to call it a religion, but it's something akin to that for me, especially. And so that brought most of my interest in sports. And then on top of that, I had this deep interest in the Bible and theology and other things like that. And so I tried to keep those two things apart for quite a while, but then eventually I just decided to go ahead and lean into it. And so started doing research on religion and sports. And that's what at first brought me to Grantland Rice.
Okay. Yeah. Explain that. What was the connection between Grantland Rice and religion and sports that you first came across? You still there?
Sorry, Andrew, my connection is getting bad. Let's see. Okay, that might be better.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can. And it stopped
Yeah. Okay.
jumping
Sorry
around.
about that.
No problem. Yeah, we can cut that part out. So now you froze.
Okay. Yeah. Dang. No, yeah. I can't tell if it's my connection or yours.
Yeah.
I'd assume it's mine because I'm on high school internet.
I can hear you fine, but the image is frozen. There you are.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, we can try.
Yeah, we can try. And then if it doesn't work, and you want to schedule like an evening time, I can do this at home as well. Because I know my internet would be probably stabler there.
Okay. Yeah, let's give it.
If you want to try and just use voice.
Yeah,
Sure.
so I'll go back to that one. So yeah, tell us more about that initial connection that you saw between Grantland Rice and sports and religion.
Yeah, so I think one of the first Rice articles I came across is the one that everybody would have come across, which is the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse about Notre Dame and their crew of running backs. And so I think at a time when I was sort of toying with the idea of writing about sports or writing about religion, going into sports writing or going into academia, Rice was someone who really appealed to me as experiencing sports the way I experienced them, as sort of these amazing cataclysms or religious transcendent euphoric type experiences. And I think that it sort of finding a kindred soul in Rice was part of what began to interest me in his work, and he as sort of like a seminal figure in a kind of cultural project of coming to try to understand ourselves through understanding sports.
And this discovery of Rice, was it almost coincidental that you were studying at Vanderbilt at the time? I mean, someone could find that Four Horsemen story going to grad school anywhere, but when did you really begin to, like, I guess, put two and two together, or to like dive into the Vanderbilt side of Grantland Rice's story?
Entirely coincidental. And in fact, it was some of the great people that work at the library there at Vanderbilt, who put together an exhibition on Rice and on his colleague, whose name I'm blanking on now.
Fred Russell.
Yes, Russell. They put together a project on that that was sort of in display outside of the Divinity Library, where I was in seminary and doing grad school work. And so I walked by and thought, oh my God, like this is exactly the kind of work I'm thinking about, as far as how this sort of like heroic athlete ideal is being constructed. That's where a lot of my work in like critical theory and other stuff from religion was coming into play. And so saw the exhibition on Rice and Russell and realized, like, oh my God, like all of their stuff is here. It's just sitting back in special collections. And so then immediately wanted to do more work with those documents in particular in some way, shape, or form. And so that's what kind of brought on this effort.
All right. Yeah. Fred Russell, protege of Grantland Rice, is who, there's a scholarship at Vanderbilt named after both Rice and Russell. And it's brought a number of high school sports writers to Vanderbilt, a full tuition scholarship, been around since the 50s. It's the reason why I came to Vanderbilt and a lot of my friends. So certainly those are two names that are really important to me and to a lot of other folks. So when you start looking into, I guess what you would call the Grantland Rice Papers or the Grantland Rice collection, what's the scope and the I guess the significance of what you're able to find?
Yeah, I think we have just a ton of documents. So there's about 340 or so things that are preserved, clippings and copies that Rice had of his stuff, as well as other memorabilia, I think. And there's other things that we want to eventually get digitized as well. But the basic idea of the project was we have all of this stuff that is Rice's record and correspondence and thought, basically. We wanted to get it up on the internet to where it was digital. You could word search it. So if you are, looking for, a through line through Rice's writing from the, World War I era all the way up to the post World War II era, you can go and find, like, what did he say about manliness throughout that entire through line? What did he say about America? I think for me personally, I come to Rice as kind of this sort of seminal force in the construction of a particular idea we have in our head about what an athlete is, what they ought to be, and what sport is, and what it ought to be in our culture. And I think sometimes I want to fight with Rice about that. Sometimes I don't think he's correct, and sometimes I think but I understand him as something so foundational to how I instinctually relate to sports. And part of that I want to be critical of, and part of it I want to understand. And so I think part of what this collection offers you is a chance to say, like, if you could talk to, as you say, like the godfather of the American sports fan mindset, like if you could find that person and figure out, talk to them about what it means to be an athlete or a hero, or, a man, or, a competitor, all of the stuff that has kind of baked into our culture of sports, all the way down to like the Little League era. You hear Grantland Rice on every Little League field in America. It's not whether you win or lose, but how you play the game. Like that, a person with that level of influence on sporting culture, we just have all of his stuff kicking around. And now you can go and look through it and sort of track as his thought develops and changes, and, see, sort of get it from the horse's mouth of, why do we think about sports this way? Where did that come from? I think this is a key part of telling that story and figuring out what it means for us as sports fans now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you said. Like sometimes you wanted to fight with him, like I think about Grantland Rice building up these heroes. And I mean, I'm no different. I have had and have sports heroes. But then, step back and realize, well, just because you can hit a fastball doesn't make you a good person, like what were the areas where you felt like maybe Rice got things wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just two sides to that exact take on like heroes. I think you're definitely right. One of the things I push my students on when we talk about sports, because I do a whole unit on religion and sports in some of my classes. And one of the things we always talk about is, okay, if sports are so good, why don't they make you a better person? and why are, and I think my internet may be going out again, so just let me know. But why is it that some of the best athletes, if sports makes you a better person, why is it that some of those best athletes are still terrible people and aren't very good at virtue and ethics or any of that stuff? That's a part I think you want to fight with Rice. And then I think the flip side of it, where you want to fight with Rice, is there is a kind of dehumanization in making someone into like a mythic god. Sometimes the sporting instinct to really just revel in the transcendentness of these athletic accomplishments is a perfectly human instinct, and I get it. But then there are other times where that tends to make you treat athletes, and we're seeing this a lot now, I think, with several instances, like Joseph Osai, just to date this podcast, I guess. Right. Joseph Osai just committed this awful penalty that lost the Bengals, it contributed to the Bengals losing to the Chiefs last night in the AFC Championship game. But it makes you treat them as some category other than just normal people, and that affects fans deeply ethically, I think, of how athletes can become sort of these like fetishized objects. Part of that is Rice's legacy of, turning these guys into these mythic figures, where then when they fall, we're either shocked, which we shouldn't be, or we are more prone to treat them as objects, which we also shouldn't be. So we treat them as like pieces on a board game. They're characters for us, for our entertainment. And that's not the way that we should be, not the way you should come into any endeavor involving human beings.
Yeah. Build them up and then tear them down. And I'm actually working on a series of books for first grade age kids called Beyond the Game, and it's looking at athletes who have done something good for humanity, outside of their sport, and really trying to get across the point that these are people more than athlete, as LeBron James said. I guess we should take a step back too, so sort of assuming that most people know who Grantland Rice is and understand his significance. But for those who don't, or if you were talking to a student about this pre-ESPN age, pre-internet age, how would you describe just what a monumentally significant, influential figure Grantland Rice was in the first half of the 20th century?
Yeah, I think it's really tough for students to get, because they do not know a world in which there is any kind of centralized narrative on an event, right? We live in a world where there are just so many different voices describing events from alternate perspectives all of the time. So you can log onto Twitter and hear 30 different takes on why the Bills offense was successful against the Bengals defense, or why it wasn't in this case. So Rice's significance is so interesting because, it harkens back more to, I guess I'd say, to date us, Andrew, over our days in which there were certain columnists you read, right? And there were a lot of them, and they were very diverse. And there weren't 10 morning shows. There was Sports Center, and that was it. These sort of centralized, there was the world news at night, and that was the only narrative you got. And now we have just this sort of Pandora's box, for better or worse, of so many different voices describing the same thing and competing over how the truth of that thing gets communicated. Rice is so rare in that he is, and was, I suppose, during that time, the central figure on saying what sporting events were, and most widely read sports columnist. And his syndicated column got printed so many places. So I think when I think about his influence and why it's such a rare thing to have a situation where that actually is the case, that if you want to go okay, well, what's the dominant voice? Usually you have competing people saying no, it's this guy, no, it's this guy, no, it's this. I think pretty much universally during this time, if you want to know what the sort of baseline opinion on a sporting event was, with all his quirks, I think it was Grantland Rice. And so if you're looking to tell the story of how sports fandom was built, not to be a broken record about it, I mean, it really is that this one guy was unavoidable as a voice within sort of the economy of sports takes. And so I think, you certainly don't want to say he is everything about sports during that time. He's pretty daggone close.
And who would you say were the legends that he built? We've talked about the Four Horsemen at Notre Dame a little bit, but who are some of the other athletes that he focused on a lot? What were the events, the major events, whether Olympics or World Series or Masters, that he really chronicled either as the first person to really do it or the best of that era.
I think the wildest thing about him is that he could do that type of legend making for anything. I've read passages of his that read like the Four Horsemen thing, and he's describing a minor league baseball game, or he's covering like a random Olympic event, and it's just as earth shattering and verbose and flowery, you would say, as him covering Jim Thorpe running down the field. I mean, I think to me the most interesting one is Thorpe. I don't know that how much of a legend he made him. I'm not entirely sure. He called him one of the greatest athletes, if not the greatest athlete that ever lived. But I think Rice's interest in Thorpe is fascinating to me because my work, if I'm doing research on sports, focuses on amateurism, on this idea of college athletes foregoing compensation in order to play their sport for the glory of the game and all that stuff. And Thorpe, during Rice's time, got into some trouble over what we would call "quote unquote" professionalism, or getting paid. And one of the great quotes that Rice has is that this was nothing new. Thorpe just got caught with the merchandise. And so I think Rice is so fascinating to me because, as is always the case, like there's nothing new under the sun. The same stories, the same things we're dealing with now, Rice was dealing with and trying to chronicle his legends. And so, I think, you can point at legend making like Ty Cobb and all these other sort of all of the stuff that Rice wrote about baseball, I think, for sure. But I'm most interested in his sort of grappling with Thorpe and his legacy of being this incredible athlete, but then also showing sort of that underside of heroism. And it's one of the few cynical moments you get from Grantland Rice is in building up this legend of Jim Thorpe, while also recognizing what he would have described, I think, is the dirtiness of college football at the time. And so I think for me, when I'm thinking about legends that Rice made, I'm thinking about Thorpe and his sort of like wrestling with him as a figure, as both like this, Herculean athlete, and also someone who was subject to kind of the truths of the world.
You're back now. All right. So,
yeah,
no, that's good. Okay, so here's a guy, Grantland Rice from Murfreesboro, right? He moved to Nashville, goes to MBA. I think his grandfather was in the Confederate Army. His father was a cotton broker in Murfreesboro. How was he, by the day's standards at the time, or by today's standards looking back, when it came to race and writing about Black athletes?
And I think this is where he's really interesting. And we say complicated, but I think also probably drops into, he caused some stuff that we're still grappling with today that I think are pretty wrong. Rice is, I think, one of the founders of and origins. He's the creator of some of the, in that he used heroic language to describe athletes. He also, I think, based in some of the casual racism of his time, tended towards monster, freak, that kind of language for all athletes, but also athletes of color. So, Joe Louis could stalk and hunt for prey and, all of this stuff that we now grapple with in our everyday interactions with everybody, because your language in so many ways shapes your world. And when one of the casual pursuits you have describes Black athletes continually as monsters and freakish, well, then you can, in your real world, begin to respond to people who look like that in the same way, with the same sort of casual worry, because you're sitting there absorbing from this language that these people possess these type of qualities. And so I think Rice, is no worse than anyone of his day, I wouldn't say. But his part of his enduring legacy is this linguistic phenomenon that he made of both dehumanizing people by making them into Greek gods, but then also of, I think, giving us some of this problematic language about athletes as freaks or monsters. And that is another kind of dehumanization that leads to a different set of results. So, on race, like you might even say that like he is for what you would expect him to be as the grandson or son of a Confederate. Like maybe he's even better than you would think, but the problem is that he opens up a sort of box through his flowery use of language that ends up having lots of unforeseen consequences later on down the road.
Yeah, right, exactly. Rippling through today. How about when it came to women athletes? Did he write much about the star women of the day, and how did he describe them or consider their athletic prowess?
Yeah, I don't know that side of his story as well. But I know just from, I'm trying to find the name of her real quick. I know
He
that
wrote about Babe Didrikson quite a
that's
bit.
the exact one I was going for. Yeah, Babe. So I know that he was ahead on her, and was calling her, was aware of her as like a really incredible story before anybody really wanted to pay attention to her. And I mean, I don't, and apart from her, I don't know his work on women that well. But I think his work, I'd assume, shows the kind of like the enthusiasm. I think I think his enthusiasm interestingly leads him into like the best parts about him and the worst parts about him. It leads him into really seeing Babe Didrikson as like this phenomenon before anybody cared at all about her. And then it also leads him into this like sort of dehumanization type language we've been talking about. So I don't know his work on women well enough to comment with any authority, but I'd say I bet it's a mixed bag in the same way.
Mm-hmm. What did you think of his writing style? I know some people, will criticize the doggerel style that he wrote in, which I think was fairly common for the day, or maybe he's the one that made it common for the day. Was he a good writer?
That's a really great question. I think he was. I think just now it's one of those things like this is a bit like asking if, and this is, I don't know if this analogy is going to work. This is kind of like asking if Nick Cage is a good actor. It's like there's some where you go, this is dadgum incredible. Like this guy, he won an Oscar. He's amazing. And then there's some where this is National Treasure Part 2. I don't know what you're doing here. I think Rice kind of lends himself to the same thing of, you're going to get what you get. And he has a style. And if you like his style, much like, say, Hemingway or something, if you love that style, there's a lot you can find in that. And you have to grapple with it as a style, regardless of whether or not you like it or not. It's still something you have to study. And so I think Rice, in that regard, you would have to consider one of the better technical writers out there. It's just that his style can get annoying if you don't like it. I think also something I didn't know until I started digging around in the archive a little bit. He wrote a ton of poetry, like whether or not it's not whether you win the game, or it's not whether you win or lose, but how you play the game. Like that comes from a poem. That's not from just a column. Like he had several, most of his stuff, came with, or he would produce poetry for most of his sports lines, which is a little periodical thing he would have. And so I think, just looking at him from a technical standpoint, whether or not his style or his, use of verbiage, it bugs you. Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, you have to take him as one of the, and frankly, like an American writer that might be very undersold as far as his influence on, writing in general. But no, he could spin a yarn.
Yeah. And certainly prolific. I mean, I think he was writing a column every day, right? That was syndicated. Mm-hmm. Nationally. He was choosing the All-American team. He was writing magazine articles. He was on newsreels, with some cases the only sports highlights that, people anywhere in the country would see. He was on the radio. So, I mean, doing everything that was possible at that time. So with all that huge universe of Grantland Rice material that's out there, I mean, is the idea that this collection will grow to eventually like include all of that? It started with what was, is every column you ever wrote part of this already, or what's the scope of what has been collected so far?
Yeah, I don't know that every column he ever wrote is in there. It is subject to just the stuff that he had and gave to Vanderbilt. If me personally, where I'd like to see it go, I've kind of left academia a bit, so I don't have access to like throwing around grant money anymore. But the first thing that we wanted to do when we initially approached this project, and the we here was myself, I should shout them out, myself, I always miss his first name, but I want to say myself, I'm just going to say Dr. Koch because I forget his first name. Dr. Koch in the poli sci department over in Vandy, and Paul Lim in the divinity school, and then most importantly Zach Johnson, who is in the special collections department at Vanderbilt Libraries, who really spearheaded making all of this happen. I just filled out some paperwork and wrote a narrative, and he did the rest of that.
Okay.
When I initially proposed it to him, I wanted to do Rice and Russell. So my hope was to get Russell up as well. But because Russell gave a whole heck of a lot more to Vanderbilt than Rice did, it would have cost a whole heck of a lot more grant money to get Russell up there. My hope is that it would grow to include Russell, since those two are paired together in the scholarship, basically.
Yeah.
And it's foundational to the culture of there at Vandy. And then a lot of Rice, we went back and forth on some of the memorabilia Rice has in there. He's got lots of old, very fun, old sports books in his collection that he gifted. The problem is you can find most of them online.
Yeah.
You know what to search for. But I liked the idea of showing the stuff that was actually in his collection. So that, I believe there's some photographs that may go live eventually that are also in the collection. But I think what we wanted to do is, since our focus was on him as sort of like a thought shaper about sports fandom, we wanted the words as much as possible in there. And then my hope would be eventually that you add Russell as sort of a pair to him, of sort of zeroing in, going from the most well syndicated, broadest read to Russell, who is more like the true Nashville side of things.
Right.
So that's my hope. I don't know if we'll see that in the future, but I know Vanderbilt is on sort of a digitization spree right now. The library is digitizing a ton of stuff. So I'm hoping that will extend eventually to Russell's papers as well.
Yeah, I would sure hope so. And I know how many admirers he has. I'm sure there would be people that would get behind that project, if they knew it was a possibility. One thing just to throw out there, both Mr. Russell, Fred Russell, and Grantland Rice were student athletes at Vanderbilt. Rice played football and baseball. I think Fred Russell played baseball. Now, how did this become something that, when I first heard from you, it was interesting to hear from a student from Tougaloo that was interested in digitizing the Grantland Rice Papers? How are you able to make that come about?
The organization I had my postdoc through at Vanderbilt, the Mellon Partners for Humanities Education. Shout out to Bonnie Dow and all the crew over there. They had a collaboration grant. And so the collaboration grant was meant to fund stuff like this, projects in the digital humanities, and to help efforts either at archiving, at studies within current archives, or any other sort of form of mapping, all the fun buzzwordy digital humanities stuff that we all know and love in academia. And so I am stationed at Tougaloo. I know faculty at Vanderbilt from my time there, and we wanted to have at least collaboration between those two sides of things. And if you could prove collaboration, the money that they had could go to any of your projects. And so I know it looks so good online, like must have been this very complicated, elaborate process, but it really was. I mean, Zach Johnson, I will again sing his praises, did the vast majority of making this happen, of just telling us. I basically filled out my narrative to tell people why Grantland Rice was important, gave it to the library and the Mellon Partners. And then I asked Zach, okay, what do I need to do to make this happen? And Zach told us, here's X, Y, and Z. We're going to send it to this company. And so all of that then quickly came together over the course of, a year and a half. And then poof, now it's up. The magic of the modern world.
Yeah. So in looking at the material, do you have either a quirky favorite or just the significance of the document itself that he donated? Like, what are some of your favorite pieces of the collection?
I haven't looked through enough of it yet to tell you my quirky favorite.
Yeah.
What I'm loving personally is just going through and going to his pre-World War I stuff, or during the World War One era. I think is a lot of fun to read some of his poetry, especially. I was reading one today before getting on the call about doing drill, in the morning, and cussing the Kaiser, which I thought was a lot of fun and real weird.
Well, he wrote a poem that I hadn't heard before about, it was used on the Vanderbilt sort of institutional commercial that would air during sporting events. And, Kumar Rocker is the star athlete that's featured, and then it has a
Mhm.
Grantland Rice poem narrating, behind it. And, and I thought it was one of the better of those commercials that you see that universities put out there during sporting events. I was doing some research for a book on the 100th anniversary of the Vanderbilt football stadium, and found in a yearbook where his poem that he wrote apparently for an alumni gathering about not whether you win or lose, but how you play the game, was included in the yearbook. And to kind of see it there where it must have been in print for one of the very first times, it was pretty special to see. And as I mentioned, receiving that scholarship changed my life. So I'm eternally grateful that Grantland Rice was Vanderbilt person, who was respected enough that people came together to endow a scholarship in his name. And now a whole new generation will be indebted to you and to your colleagues' work in putting all of this archive together. I'm excited to check it out and also to see where it goes. And hopefully, as you mentioned, that Fred Russell's papers will be the next piece of that. So, Jason, thank you for your time. You're in a high school. You said maybe a bell would go off, and I think we made it through.
Yeah,
So, just the
we made it
last thing,
through.
if people are interested in checking out this collection, how do they do it?
So you'll have to go to the special collections section of the Vanderbilt Library website, and then find the Grantland Rice Papers. We do not have a handy link for it yet. It's still kind of buried back in sort of the archived collections, but it's on JSTOR. So if you go to JSTOR, you can search it out. It's called Grantland Rice Papers. And I'd assume eventually a link will be posted more to the library website, or you can always go to my Twitter feed. I'm at Jason is a Smith on Twitter. And I had it pinned for a while. I'll repin it to make sure you can find it, but I've got it posted up there as well.
All right. And this is great timing. Vanderbilt celebrates its sesquicentennial, easy for me to say,
Yeah.
this year, 2023. And there's a lot of attention focused on various aspects of the history of the university. So this is perfect timing for that. So congratulations, Jason. And thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Andrew.